Okay, so for my second source, I've chosen White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy Mcintosh, which we use for discussion post number 1, I believe. Um, and I chose this because this article sort of introduced me to some fundamental concepts that I never really considered before, which is strange because they're quite intuitive and they build on concepts that I was familiar with coming into the course. In particular, with regards to privilege and prejudice, I've always been aware that society and its institutions can be, and unfortunately often are, prejudice against different groups, particularly in Canada, with sort of anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, anti-LGBTQ plus prejudice. And as I've gotten older, I think sort of coinciding with society's realization, I've become more aware of the opposite of prejudice, so privilege. Although later in the article she talks about how they're not really opposites, they're really intertwined, which is sort of one of the bits I had never really considered before. That there's privilege in Canadian society for whiteness, for men and manliness, and this article really pulled those two concepts together for me and introduced me to an argument that you would think I would have figured out sort of for myself, and you think a lot of people would figure it out. But the idea that to end prejudice, it's necessary to end privilege, that the two are linked. And you think about Canadian criminal justice and Canadian society being prejudiced against Indigenous groups and against Indigenous society and Indigenous culture, that goes hand in hand with it being prejudice against, privilege for white people, men, think sort of the settler, colonialist points of view, and those actors that were who've had privilege for such a long time, since the settlement of Canada, now still have privilege now, which is probably not an accident. It's the way that these institutions and society has been set up. And the author sort of went down the same journey that I did, considered prejudice and privilege, but had never really put the two and two together and seen the link, and that society as a whole, not just her or I, have ignored privilege. She says on page 1, privilege is an exercise in oppression. That in exercising that privilege, you're a participant in a damaged society, and you're unfairly advantaged, which I think is definitely true, but I had never really thought of. And then, you consider the ways in which this Indigenous racism really provides benefits to someone like me, and obviously harms the Indigenous community and the people in it a lot. She says on page 5, someone like me being confident, comfortable, and sort of oblivious makes other groups more likely to be unconfident, uncomfortable, alienated. And unfortunately, she didn't get into ways that we can sort of address and tackle these issues. But I don't blame her. That would be a very long paper. We talk about other in the course. It's not necessarily in this paper, but the idea of colonial and settler society. Every institution that we have in Canada is based on that, and that's fundamentally built on white and male privilege. So I don't blame her for not getting into that. That would be a very long paper. But my main takeaway was conceptualizing prejudice and privilege being together. Tackling one is to tackle the other. And I thought it was very interesting on page 1. He was talking about addressing privilege and prejudice is not making them more like us. It's not about making Indigenous people like me. It's about the prejudiced and privileged groups coming to a neutral ground. There's less dominance and less of a power struggle.